Giovanni Maria Ciocchi del Monte, or Pope Julius III, might truly be the most scandalous pope in history. It's 1549 and a conclave of 48 cardinals is assembled to select the next leader of the Roman Catholic Church. Pope Paul III, whose papacy was marked by both widespread intra-Christian turmoil across Europe and internal frustration around the nepotistic promotion of certain members of his family, had died in the midst of a Catholic crisis. The Protestant Reformation was in full swing, and the Catholic Church needed to make a strong statement in its defense. What followed was called the Council of Trent, a series of meetings among Catholic leaders that sought to decide which changes could be made to church governance, as well as address criticism of certain Catholic doctrines made by men like Martin Luther. These meetings had been ongoing for nearly 5 years, and their future was on the ballot. Of the 48 cardinals who were to select the 220th pope, one faction believed the Council of Trent had run its course, while another believed it had not yet accomplished its aims. A third main faction had a man in mind for the job, the grandson of the recently deceased Pope Paul, Cardinal Alessandro Farnese. Giovanni del Monte expertly placed himself in the center of these factions. As history would later record, he was in favor of reconvening the council, but was able to win over the support of those opposed. After a 3-month-long conclave, on February 7, 1550, Pope Julius emerged. In 1551, the Council of Trent was reconvened. During these years, Julius would spend most of his time at the Villa Julia, a lavish estate constructed at Julius's request. The Villa Julia comprised a 3-level estate with ornate loggia, overlooking a large central fountain ringed by statues, as well as 3 vineyards extending to the shores of the river Tiber. The Villa Julia was a workplace to Michelangelo, the renowned Renaissance artist. Today, parts of the Villa Julia still stand and are home to the National Etruscan Museum. High-level officials in the Catholic Church were dismayed by Julius's lack of interest in ecclesiastical or political affairs, and pleaded with him to refocus his attention away from architecture and art to the needs of the Church. But soon, Julius would make them wish that was the Church's only problem. One day, in the late 1540s, a young boy of only 13 or 14 named Innocenzo found his way to the city of Piacenza, where, through circumstances lost to time, he came to know the governor, a man named Baldovino, who was the brother of Pope Julius. Innocenzo was the poor and illiterate son of a destitute woman and had left home in search of a job. He worked for Baldovino as a velero, or a personal assistant of sorts. As time went on, his responsibilities grew to taking care of the future pope's pet monkey. At as young as 14 years old, Innocenzo was brought into the Del Monte household. The future pope took a special liking to Innocenzo, and when Giovanni del Monte was elevated to the papacy, Innocenzo was adopted into the family, becoming the pope's adopted nephew, and in only a short period, a cardinal. What would take a normal man decades to achieve had been given to an illiterate teenager for whom the pope reportedly had a special affinity in only a matter of a few years. The closeness between this man and his adopted teenage nephew would soon begin to raise eyebrows, with Cardinal Giovanni Carafa, who would become pope only a matter of years later, telling Julius that his treatment of the mysterious young man would give rise to, quote, evil suppositions among the top ranks of the church. But Julius, who had assured the papal conclave of 1550 that he was a moderate, did not change his behavior toward his adopted nephew in the slightest. He appointed him to cushy, paying roles in abbeys across the country, despite Innocenzo's utter lack of qualifications and his age, only about 17 years old. The Pope's enemies within the Vatican became reinvigorated with news of his strange behavior. One critic said Pope Julius awaited Innocenzo's occasional returns to Rome like, quote, a lover awaiting a mistress. A European ambassador to Venice wrote that the Pope, quote, took Innocenzo into his bedroom and into his own bed as if he were his own son or grandson. a friar who served as the librarian to Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, who Pope Julius had successfully kept from the papacy only a matter of years earlier, wrote that Julius was, quote, entangled in love for boys. Innocenzo, however, would soon strain this strange, incestuous relationship. Reports from the time indicate that Innocenzo engaged in an affair with his adoptive cousin-in-law, Orsilia Cortesi, who was married to the son of Baldovino del Monte, the man who had kindly taken in a poor and destitute Innocenzo when he was only 13 years old. Humiliated by these rumors, Julius considered punishing the young cardinal, but could not bring himself to do it. Julius's papacy is marked less by his accomplishments than by the lack of them. He canonized no saints, suspended the Council of Trent only 2 years after he had resumed it to much fanfare, and seemed utterly uninterested in anything but enjoying the lavish lifestyle afforded by his position in the church. This scandal would outlive even Pope Julius himself. When Julius died of gout just over 5 years after he had been appointed pope, Innocenzo remained a cardinal and an embarrassment to the top officials in the Vatican. He took part in the conclaves that occurred after his adopted uncle's death and was preparing to take part in another when in 1559 he murdered a father and son who, quote, uttered ill words about him. Pope Pius IV ordered Innocenzo imprisoned in the Castle Sant'Angelo, and after a lengthy process, he was banished to a town 30 kilometers north of Rome. Still, Innocenzo refused to be cast out. In 1565, he participated in the conclave that appointed Pope Pius V and was closely watched by Vatican guards. He was banished once again in 1567 when he was accused of raping 2 women in Tuscany. But shockingly, he was soon allowed back in Rome when cardinals with whom he was friendly petitioned Pope Gregory XIII personally. In 1577, Innocenzo died at the age of 45 and was placed in an unmarked grave beneath the Church of San Pietro in Montorio of Rome, which houses the Del Monte family chapel. In The Cardinals of the Holy Roman Church, biographer Salvador Miranda writes that Innocenzo's burial was, quote, unattended. There was no commemoration of his cardinalate, and no prayers for the repose of his soul. Shunned and ignored in life, he was forgotten in death.